Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on theory and methods, looking at Marxism. Before we look at the contributions of Marxism, it's worth recapping on some of the key concepts associated with Marxism that you may have covered earlier on in the specification. Marxism is a conflict theory, and one that suggests that in a capitalist society there exists a class conflict between the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, and the subject class or the working class, the proletariat, over competing interests and resources. According to Marx, the ruling class exploits the labour of the subject class in order to gain as much profit as possible. This includes paying them low wages, making them work long hours, giving them no holidays or sick benefits, and stopping them from challenging their authority by threatening them with unemployment. They can do this because they own the forces of production, the factories, machinery and materials that are needed to produce goods for people to consume. In contrast, the subject class only have their own labour, and they want to be able to afford the goods that they produce and so look to earn as much money as possible. But the more they are paid, the less profit there is for the ruling class, and that is where the conflict between the ruling class and the subject class exists. Of course, class conflict is not as simple as one side wanting profit and the other side wanting higher wages, and in this video we're going to examine some of the more subtle forms of exploitation and alienation that exists according to those from the Marxist tradition. When we think about Marxism, inevitably we focus on the works of Karl Marx, and despite Marx's ideas being over 150 years old, Marx remains highly influential to those that follow his ideologies. In A-Level Sociology, we have come across Marx in some of the units: stratification, beliefs, work, poverty and welfare. But his legacy stretches beyond those topic areas, especially given his influence on the work of neo-Marxist theorists. Many might see neo-Marxism as a separate perspective to Marxism, but essentially neo-Marxism is a more contemporary update on Marxist ideas, maintaining the focus on inequality between the social classes, but utilising the work of other theorists rather than adhering solely to the ideas of Marx. There are two key theorists we're going to look at in this video alongside Marx, and they are Antonio Gramsci, who is present in beliefs and stratification and put forward a version of humanistic Marxism, and Louis Althusser, who we've come across in education and crime and to a lesser extent in family life, and his concepts of structural Marxism. As an extension, you could also look at the work of the Frankfurt School, the likes of Adorno and Marcuse, whose combination of psychoanalysis and philosophy shifted Marxist ideas away from the traditional interpretations of Marx towards a more novel understanding of inequality in society. But first we'll look at the work of Karl Marx. Now, it's difficult to try and explain all of Marx's ideas in a 10-minute video, but some of the key concepts that Marx introduced were the conflict between the two social classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and detailing the conflict between those at the time of the Industrial Revolution across Europe. One of Marx's concepts that has been explored throughout the specification is the concept of the infrastructure and the superstructure, and this has influenced many different theorists. Marx suggested that the bourgeoisie had economic control over the proletariat, but they were also able to control their behaviours in a more subtle way than withholding wages or denying them access to goods. Marx argued that because the bourgeoisie controlled the economic base, society's infrastructure, work, the economy, banking, etc., they were also able to control the superstructure of society, that is, the social, cultural and political institutions, and this helps to keep the proletariat from revolting. For example, education is controlled by the state, which teaches students not to question authority. The newspapers are owned by the ruling class, which teaches subservience and deference to those in power. Laws are made in the interests of the ruling class, who make up the majority of the government. Even the family reinforces the ideas that they have been fed by institutions such as religion, education and media. Our arts and culture are based upon the tastes of the elite rather than those of the subject class. And this theory arguably influenced other thinkers, for example Bourdieu in his ideas on cultural capital. We can argue that concepts such as the ethnocentric curriculum are rooted in Marx's ideas of the superstructure, while representations of the elite in the media are another example of this in action. A further concept defined by Marx was that of alienation. Marx suggested that people drew meaning from work and felt a sense of accomplishment from seeing the finished product they worked so hard to create. Marx argued that the process of industrialisation removed that sense of accomplishment from workers and alienated them from any joy of achievement. Marx also argued that under capitalism the bourgeoisie wielded more power and eventually society would become more polarised, and that inevitably when the proletariat realised their exploitation and alienation at the hands of the bourgeoisie, they would revolt. While many things Marx argued came to pass, one major criticism remains, is that capitalism is yet to be overthrown. Antonio Gramsci built upon Marx's work by suggesting the concept of hegemony. Gramsci suggested that the ruling class maintained its dominance in society through passing on hegemonic ideas through the institutions they controlled. These ideas justified the control that the ruling class had over the subject class. Ideas such as the ruling class were better educated, had more moral fibre, and were paternalistic towards the masses. Gramsci, in contrast to Marx, believed that many of the subject class were aware of this, what he referred to as a dual consciousness, and argued that through education, a new generation of intellectuals would rise to challenge the hegemonic ideas of society, and the subject classes would revolt. We can see evidence of Gramsci's idea in contemporary society with challenges to the dominant ideologies of neoliberalism coming from left-leaning academics and writers. We can also apply these ideas to our understanding of education and the need for increased social mobility of minority ethnic groups and working class pupils. A further neo-Marxist thinker, and one we've come across several times, is Louis Althusser. Althusser's concept of structural Marxism can also be seen to be heavily influenced by the traditional Marxist view. He argued that the ruling class uses different methods to control the populace. The ruling class are heavily outnumbered by the subject class, and so need to instill structural methods of control so that their position at the top of the social hierarchy goes unchallenged. Althusser suggested the ruling class utilised two different apparatuses in order to achieve this. Firstly, they control the way people act and the way people think through the ideological state apparatus. This is a subtle method of using social institutions to alter the way people think so they do not challenge those above them. In education, this is achieved through the myth of meritocracy, simultaneously encouraging children with opportunities whilst denying them equal access to education due to material deprivation. This can also be seen in media, religion and family, with norms and values being passed on by those in control of the institution. If you behave, you are rewarded, you go to heaven, people will like you. The role of the ideological state apparatus is to make people conform. However, if people do not conform, then the ruling class utilise the repressive state apparatus, the use of coercion and physical control by institutions such as the police, the military and the judiciary. The more effective the ISA performs, the less the RSA has to do, and this can be evidenced in education, crime and other areas of the specification. Marxism and neo-Marxism have been criticised by others for being deterministic, both socially and economically. Marx's ideas have been criticised for assuming people are cultural dopes, unaware of their exploitation, but more recent theorists such as Eliot suggest that people are aware of their exploitation but choose to conform all the same. Marx is also criticised for being economically determinist, stating the economy and capitalism were the key factors in exploitation, rather than examine other aspects of exploitation such as social location, gender and ethnicity. However, it can be argued that neo-Marxism sought to address some of these claims. There is also a long-standing debate in sociology between Weber and the ghost of Marx. Weber criticised Marx's idea of polarisation, instead suggesting that the ruling class would expand the middle classes by giving them limited access to wealth in return for being compliant. This can be evidenced by the expansion of the middle class in the UK. However, despite these criticisms, Marxism remains an incredibly relevant social, economic and philosophical ideology. It has strongly influenced democratic socialism in South America and sections of Europe, and has evolved to try and adapt to the crises of capitalism that the world has faced in the 21st century. Part of this is because Marx's ideas of polarisation and capitalism reaching the point where surplus value can no longer be expanded have proven to be correct. This is no more evident than the polarisation of political ideologies in the UK in recent years, while the collapse of businesses and the growth of multinational corporations suggest that wealth is being concentrated into fewer hands than ever before. This is in part due to the impacts of globalisation and cultural imperialism, which fit neatly into Marx's explanation of the infrastructure and the superstructure. Marxism remains incredibly relevant in the 21st century as a critique of the failings of capitalist society. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on theory and methods looking at Marxism. Thanks for watching.